Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
So now we have this further sort of, movement forward that Coppin actually doesn't take any time to ask Lady Jane to validate Wheezy's leads anymore. He's just kind of going with the flow, and Lady Jane's now obliged to kind of just go along with it. So words actually written, and I want to read these because I think it's important that they are read in the context of the time and not just me reiterating. So it says, I have no hesitation in telling you that the child's chart represented the ships as being in a channel which we believed at the time to be inaccessible, but which it has since been found they have actually navigated. So that's written by Lady Jane. Moreover, the names Victory and Victoria, written by the little girl on her chart, correspond with a point, that would be Point Victory, on King William's Island, where the important record of Erebus and Terror was found, and with that of the strait or channel Victoria Strait, where the ships were initially lost. Okay, so how weird is this? That full circle now, Lady Jane is acknowledging that all of the information that she had received from Coppin, and then she had sent at least 3 expeditions out, they come back. She's now saying that the information that that little girl gave to her sister is validated, essentially. And especially with Victoria Strait. It didn't exist at the time that this little girl's ghost came forward to speak. Yet how was she aware that this is where the ships would end up, being lost in the ice?
Yeah.
So really, really strange happening. So do we have this little girl, Wheezy, to thank for actually pinpointing where the expedition was lost? I mean, I don't think it was just her, spiritual messages in general, but clearly knowing to send the captain and the ships southward instead of further north or further west was a big part in finding the island where the men were buried, the Inuit who had discovered some of the possessions from the ships, then this inlet and this strait, Victoria Strait, as is now known, where the ships finally kind of came to an end.
Well, the story of the Inuit stories, I don't know about the Erebus, but the Terror, there have been Inuit stories for years that said, there's a ship right there, that they could see the mast sticking up out of the water.
Right, yes.
And all the search efforts just went, oh, you're crazy. That's ridiculous. There's no way the Franklin ships could have gone down, that far south. Rubbish. And when they discovered the Terror in 2016, it was exactly where the Inuit stories said that it was.
Of course it is, because they said, and that's passed down. But is it not strange that we have this inexplicable information that comes forward, and while not 100% accurate, because little Wheezy claimed that Franklin was still alive, that she saw him as alive, and he had already been dead for the better part of a year. But in that other, realm, if you like, in the energy realm, perhaps she did see him as being alive. Even though he had passed in the physical realm, he would have appeared very much alive to her in that realm in which they coexist. So it's just an interesting story that, there's this this small 3-year-old child's ghost who inexplicably was able to name Victoria Strait, which had not been named,
Right.
and at that point in time, and that there was, the idea of the initials are, the island itself and the strait itself, plus, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I, as a, afterlife switchboard operator, like to believe that, this information comes forward. But I think what is so astounding to many people is perhaps if it was a spirit of a woman who was, 16 or 20 or 30, it might not have seemed so strange, but it was a 3-year-old child.
3-year-old, yeah.
No way of knowing. So, if somebody was 16 or 18 or able to read or, hear the stories going back to the 1840s, not the 1940s, the 1840s of the initial expeditions, maybe something could have made sense that they had that story or they knew something about it. And so their spirit coming forward may have known something. But I just find it astounding that it was a 3-year-old toddler who
That's amazing.
delivered this
That's amazing.
And again, it's one of those unexplainable things that comes together where there's this history side of things where it's very cut and dry. We have all of the historic references. We have the notes. We have the documentation. We have further scientific study. We now know what happened to the expedition. But yet at the time we had this story that kind of got buried. And like you said, you'd never even heard of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, these paranormal stories, these bits of information often get pushed away as uncreditable. And, people don't think that they're worthy of being added to the historical annals. I think as people, we understand that there are things that are not explained and that regardless of, how this information came forward, it did come forward. And whether or not it was little Wheezy, the ghost of, or perhaps it was her older sister who was maybe, reading things and bringing this forward. But it's still kind of unexplainable because how would her sister, the living sister, know about the future naming of Victoria Strait?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I find that part probably one of the most interesting bits of the whole thing. Because it wasn't until some years later that it became known as that. Yet that information had been written down on this chart that this other child had drawn based on her little sister's information.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
the Franklin expedition.
Well, talking about the paranormal, I have been asked a few times over the years on various platforms that I work with. I've been asked if I could go anywhere in the world to do a paranormal investigation, where would I go?
Right.
And I'm going to tell you the top of my list is Beachy Island and investigate those 3 grave sites.
Right. It would be an interesting site for sure.
It would be. Yeah. That's top of my list. If you could give me an all expenses paid investigation, Beachy Island, number 1 on my list for sure.
That's interesting. I'm of the I think that's a fascinating location for sure because so much went on there and there was so many different, there's still a lot of unanswered questions around the Franklin you know, but
Well, I actually know a gentleman who's been there.
oh,
And I actually had the pleasure to work with him
wow.
back in the 90s when I was doing film and television editing work. And this gentleman is Dr. Joe McInnes,
Oh, okay.
who is a very well-known Canadian underwater scientist.
Wow.
And he was involved in some of the searching
Oh, for
of
the
the
ship.
Franklin expedition in the later years,
Right.
like back in the 80s, if I can call the 80s later years.
That's pretty long ago now,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and there was one of the ships that was involved in the search efforts for Franklin. It was a supply ship. It was called the HMS Breadalbane,
Hmm.
and it was delivering supplies to Beechy Island, where when the Admiralty was doing its search efforts, they used Beechy Island as their base.
Okay.
And so the Breadalbane was coming in to deliver supplies to Beechy Island. And just like all the other ships, it got caught in the pack ice
Wow.
and sank.
Oh,
And Dr. Joan McInnes is the one who discovered the ship in 1984.
wow.
And so, yeah, I've had the pleasure of actually meeting him, working with him on a different project.
That's cool though. I've never,
Yeah,
I have a great deal of respect for underwater archaeology because I don't like underwater. I love water, but I'm not a fan of diving. And it's just me. It's like I love caves. And as you were saying, like a place I would love to be able to do an investigation of sorts would be like Lascaux Cave in France, the decorated art, you know, very early history cave where we see these beautiful cave paintings that were done by our European ancestors, and the Denisovian and the Neanderthal and Homo sapien at a period of time where we were all walking on the earth together. And I just think that that would have an incredible amount of energy and stories and probably spirits that are still residing in and around this area. But it's fascinating that people are able to do underwater archaeology because I'm not one of them. But yeah, what a find, right? I mean, I know when I heard that they had found the two ships, it was really exciting to
it was. Oh, yeah.
because those ships literally just dropped down through the ice and sunk, and everything was still in place other than what had been taken from the ships.
Yeah, yeah.
Were very well intact, and to see them a little like the Hamilton and Scourge in Lake Ontario, right, where we see very well preserved ships in very cold
Yeah.
water. And
Well,
so,
this ship, the Breadalbane, that Dr. McInnes found, I believe it is claimed to be the most number one well-preserved
complete,
shipwreck in the Arctic.
nice.
Yeah, and as you say, it got crushed in the pack ice and just went boop, straight down and is perfectly preserved.
Wow. And that's a fascinating aspect too. And that is very surreal unto itself to see ships that are very well preserved in, at the bottom of the ocean per se, sea, water, lakes, that just kind of
Yeah, well, even okay, just sort of off topic here. Shackleton's
yes,
Endeavour
yes.
was found a couple years ago, and they say it's just perfectly preserved.
Another one.
I've seen a couple photographs of it, and it's just amazing.
Right. I mean, obviously, too, like we say, the Hamilton and Scourge in Lake Ontario, just off the coastline of Jordan there, incredibly preserved. two ships that went down in the War of 1812 because of weather, not because of the actual battle.
Right.
But, we see these ships that are still, astoundingly intact, and it's weird. It's very surreal. It is very otherworldly that, they just are sitting there as relics of, what once was. And I'm always fascinated. I mean, obviously I went into archaeology for a reason because and it wasn't for me, it wasn't about digging up, bones. It was, I mean, my specialty is, I have a Bachelor of Science, so I'm not one of the digging people. I'm one of the people who receives the information and gets to process that information as a researcher. But I'm also a person who spent time studying sites, as in battlefield sites. That's my background, is battlefield archaeology, and the sites and the topography and the weather and all of those other things that get forgotten about that actually impact, an outcome in a battle. So that was kind of my thing. And I was always fascinated, again, like with the ships too, right? They go down in battle, and you have these preserved, pieces of history that can tell stories, and, not just visual stories and historical stories, but also stories from, the paranormal as well, when we have, this interaction with spirits and that offers things that we will never know, even if they, because sometimes those things are just not written.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.